Today, we'll be exploring, in particular, the Israeli-Palestine conflict, one of the oldest but still prevalent issues in the Eastern world. Our goal today is to hopefully educate whoever's viewing this video with nothing but genuine facts and information, something rare to come across in this day and age is fake news and propaganda. We'll start our journey with some backstory on the original course of events to escalate the conflict according to history.
The start of the conflict originates from the beginning of World War I and the end of the Ottoman Empire when it was defeated by the Allies. The Turkish national movement, led by Ataturk, won the War of Independence. This area controlled by the Ottoman Empire is today's Iraq, Syria, Israel, and Egypt. This revolution would have a profounding effect on the mainly Arab and Israeli population of the area. This would be known as the Arab-Jewish conflict, later the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and finally the Arab-Israeli conflict between the Zionists and the Arab nationalists. At the outbreak of World War II, both Palestinians and Zionists enlisted in large numbers, 21,000 Jews and 8,000 Palestinians. However, they both believed that British imperialism was the enemy of their freedom. By 1944, the Jewish had planned attacks on British arms and supply depots. There were various training camps to train soldiers to fight the British. World War II ended. However, this has not resolved the conflicts within the then Palestine state. Britain, unable to resolve the conflicts between the Jews and Arabs, requests that the United Nations try to solve the question of Palestine. Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Saudi Arabia request that the United Nations terminate the mandate over Palestine and declare its independence, but this was rejected. In November 29, 1947, the final decision, voted 7-3, was a partition plan, dividing Palestine into separate Jewish and Palestinian states. During the late 1940s, the Arab-Israeli War of 1948 broke out when 5 Arab nations invaded territory in the former British Mandate of Palestine, immediately after the Israeli Declaration of Independence. The result of the 1948 war, Israelis hold roughly 60-70% of the Palestinian state. Israel signs armistice agreements with Egypt, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. The Arab-Israeli war, though not conflict, is officially over. The First Intifada was the collective uprising of various Palestinian nationalist groups through the accumulation of tensions within Israel. This ended in a stalemate, with the Palestinians unable to expel the Israelis from the territories and Israeli failure to stop the violence. The PLO made peace with Israel and evacuated the West Bank and Gaza Strip. Further, Hamas, a nationalist Islamist group, was formed late in 1987 because of the Intifada, which would eventually lead to many conflicts and deaths of civilians on both sides. They carry out the first suicide bombing attack within Israel. Fast forward to the 1990s, the Cairo Agreement is signed between Israel and the PLO, which transferred over control of the Gaza Strip and a 65 square kilometer area. The Oslo Accords, signed in 1995, were ultimately responsible for establishing the Palestinian Authority, allowing them to have the freedom to govern themselves in certain areas. Suicide bombing from Hamas extremist groups and protest rallies from Israeli extremists show that both sides would use violence to hinder the peace. The beginning of the new millennium brought about a new conflict, the Second Intifada. This wave of protests and violence included Palestinian youths banding with armed police against Israeli soldiers backed by tanks and helicopters. This led to suicide bombing increasing in frequency, killing around 300 Israelis. In 2007, Hamas takes over Gaza and Israel blockades Gaza in response. Within the same year, the Annapolis Peace Conference takes place, in which President Bush of the US, Prime Minister Ehud Olmert of Israel and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas agree upon ending the bloodshed and fighting. Further fighting ensues when Hamas fire a barrage of rockets into Israel. Israel, soon after the bombardment, announces ceasefire and withdrawal of its troops from Gaza. This brings us to the present. The conflict has not yet been resolved, with various countries providing support to various sides, resulting in clashes and fighting which, so far, have no possible outcome.
As you can see, the Israeli-Palestine conflict is one of multiple dimensions and complexities. To further understand the different sides of the conflict, we have interviewed two members from both the Israeli and Palestinian sides in an effort to uncover more about each party. These perspectives will further improve our understanding and allow for a greater insight into the Israeli-Palestine conflict.
Well, if I look at as of today, the reality is Israel exists there. It may not have existed in the right manner, how it was established, may not be something I would agree with, but reality is Israel exists today. Does Palestine? Absolutely. Palestine is a country which is under occupation and has been under occupation for a long time, over 60 years. So I recognize both countries. If you look at even the United Nations, it recognizes it. It recognizes Palestine as an occupied country. So there may be certain countries or certain interest groups that would like to promote that view, but that's not the reality.
So no, I don't recognise both as countries. I recognise Israel's country, but not Palestine. And I say that because there is not a state of Palestine. I can't recognise something that doesn't exist. I recognise that there is Palestinian national aspirations, and I recognise that. It's important to note that there is a big misconception around Palestine, and that there has never ever been a state of Palestine historically. The last actual state before the modern state of Israel was the Jewish state around the Roman times, and since then it's always been ruled by other empires. That's a good question. I certainly don't obviously believe it should be to the extent of that would risk Israel's security and risk the Israel, in a sense, signing its own death warrant. So any agreement that obviously has to come through a political solution, any agreement has to acknowledge that Israel has the right to exist and has the right to exist with secure borders, with security, and it has to recognise the Jewish nature of the state as well.
Well, look, the resolution of any conflicts, any issues comes through dialogue. And dialogue has to come as equal partners. You can't hold a gun to somebody's head and say, now have a dialogue with me and agree. I'm not saying that both parties won't have to make a compromise. I think there has to be a compromise. I hope we can do it, they can do it as soon as they can, earlier the better, because less bloodshed, less misery that we are seeing there is better. Would love to see a conflict resolved, and would like to see it dealt in a fair and equitable manner. When I talk about fair, I actually mean fair. It has to be fair, and it has to be seen to be fair. It's not actually something that you can hold somebody hostage and say, well, thou shalt do this, and otherwise consequences are this. So that doesn't give that fairness. Look, I will come back to the same point earlier, victors and who have strong press. Unfortunately, I think that reflect how Palestinian cause has been sort of portrayed in the media. There's more of violence, terrorism, sort of people tying themselves and blowing themselves up, whereas nobody asked the question why somebody would be that desperate to do that to themselves. Unfortunate part of it all is that who are victims are actually being sort of called as being aggressors, and ones that are aggressors, they're actually being called victims, and it's a tragedy.
So there's a lot of prejudice and bias in the media. and a lot of false information. So literally this morning I was looking at something online in South Africa. One of the trade unions in South Africa who believes in the boycott, disinvestment and sanctions campaign against Israel tweeted a photo trying to show how the Palestinians have been refugees since the 1950s or whatever, or before. The only problem was that picture was actually Jewish refugees who were expelled from Arab lands after the state of Israel was created. So, and this is not the first time we've seen pictures that do not represent the Palestinian side actually being used to try and perpetuate the Palestinian narrative. So there is a lot of false stuff. Now that may have been done intentionally or not, I don't know. Yeah. But there's a lot of false information. Unfortunately, if you look at the Palestinian education system, both in Gaza, which is under Hamas, and also in the West Bank, which under the Palestinian Authority, which is under Fatah, which is Mahmoud Abbas's group, the education system is very, very, very biased. It's very, very anti-Jewish, not just anti-Israel, but anti-Jewish. If you go online, you can see plenty of videos from Gaza, where in kindergartens at the end of the year, where they do, the kindergarten show. What are the kids doing? Their show is not about Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or the nativity play or whatever it is, or about something about Muhammad or whatever it might be. It's about dressing up as Hamas operatives and killing and kidnapping Israeli Jews. Yeah. So until you change that education system and that prejudice that is being inbuilt into the Palestinian people, it is going to be difficult to actually come to resolution. Well, without a doubt, in the sense that historically there's been lots of terrorism in Israel. There's been the two intifadas, there's been bus bombings, suicide bombings, hijacking of planes, terrorist attacks across Europe against Israeli targets and stuff. So without a doubt, it's had a negative impact.
Israeli army uses and tests their weapons, which they sell overseas globally, on Palestinians. You can go and I don't actually have to give you the example. You can go and watch any videos on YouTube and see how little children as 8-year-old, 9-year-olds are treated. I've actually been to Palestine, and I saw little kids actually being, I'm talking about 8-year-old and 10-year-old children in Jerusalem, being harassed by police. They were actually picked up at the side and really, very aggressive attitude. I've seen. There is no such thing as conflict being meaningful. Okay, I think the resolutions are meaningful. Yeah. And conflict is really horrible because it's got victims, it's got suffering that goes on, and we see that every day. We see Palestinians dying from hunger, they're being bombed, there have been bulldozers, there have been sort of machines and bulldozers that have been run over their communities, their land is being taken, they're being chucked out of their homes. And how would you feel somebody comes to your house, says it's not your house anymore, it's my house?
I guess the fact the conflict is still going on after 100 or so years, even though the state of Israel is only 70 years, I guess shows that for a lot of people it is meaningful. It's meaningful in the sense that I believe that the Jewish people have a right to live in Israel, and we have a right to a Jewish state. So the need for a Jewish homeland is as important as ever, and that's absolutely worth fighting for.
Look, you can't blame on one, but the important thing is if you go and start looking at the blame, you can talk until cows come home and blame everybody else. What can you do today to fix it?
These two cultural perspectives gave an excellent insight into this issue. What we found interesting was how both sides believed that the media was misrepresenting them. As well as this, their contrasting stances on recognizing Palestine as a country were intriguing. Thanks to both Clark and Rob, and to anyone watching this, we hope to have shed some light on this complex conflict. Thank you.